So welcome. We're glad you're here today. Today we're going to talk about redemption, to redeem something and to be redeemed. God's plan has always been that you and I would be part of redemption. Now here's what redemption means. It simply means to buy back. Say that with me. Redemption means to buy back. See, some of y'all jumped to the definition, but I'm talking about redemption. So redemption means so making up for some deficit, shortcoming, or sin, or something that could not be dealt unless somebody redeemed it. All of us know what redemption is like. We know what it's like. I know what it's like to be redeemed when I was sent to the principal's office when I was young, and back when they could use paddles on me that were plastic and had holes in them, and whistled long before, it whistled through the air before it attached to my derriere. And I know what it is like when my parents come to redeem me from something where I have messed up and got jacked up and messed up. You and I have been redeemed. When a mother and a father take care of a child that makes no contribution to the family except to keep them awake at night and to scream and to mess up their diapers, and when you go to love that child, to change the diaper, to feed them, to love them, it's part of redeeming the world. You know what it's like to be redeemed. All of us, at some point in our life or another, have seen a blue light behind us, whether it was for us or for somebody else. And if it was for you, they stopped you, asked for your driver's license and the registration, and then they gave you a ticket with a fine that you had to pay to redeem so that you could keep driving. I know it. You're going like you're stirring around bad memories. I came to church to be powerful and hopeful. Okay, we're gonna get to that. That's definitely true. But somebody redeemed you. You had to buy that back. Maybe you understand what redemption is like from an insurance perspective, because there's been an accident and there was something bent on another car. And so you know what it's like over the next 3 years to have to pay back to recoup the money they spent on you repairing that car plus yours, right? You're going like, man, you're depressing me, Pastor Ray. I'm just doing this because I have had personal experience in all of them. Redemption is important. And so one of the things that we're seeking to do this year is we go through the scripture together. We're calling this the red thread because the blood of God that keeps our lives functioning, that is the life of our flesh, ultimately is the pathway by which redemption is used. But there is a thread that goes all the way through the Bible. And so we're learning it. By the end of the year, we're going to learn the Bible in 50 words, but let me kind of catch you back up if you've not been going with us. So just repeat after me. God made, Adam bit, Noah arked, Abraham split. Jacob fooled. You don't have to know the hand motions. Joseph ruled. Bush talked. Moses balked. Pharaoh played. People walked. Seas divided. Tablets guided. Then promise landed. You guys are already halfway through knowing the Bible in 50 words. And Justin Wallace, our family pastor and longtime student pastor, if you were here last week, did he not do an extraordinarily good job? He was really so grateful to have Justin and have been here over the long term, and thank for him and his team and all that they do. He talked to you about judges. This is the next time when the people of God are in the promised land. It's after the time of conquest. And here's the phrase that's used in Judges. It was a time when everybody did what was right in their own eyes. You and I know what that kind of like, don't we? And he talked about the cycles that they went through. God's people would get in trouble, and they'd cry out to God, and God would rescue them, and then they would be bad again over periods of 30 and 40 years in cycles. Incidentally, if you want to get a picture of what the book of Judges is about in the Bible, imagine this. Imagine a judge in a black robe with one of those old school long wigs on, riding a motorcycle. You'll never forget it. Judges is about cycles, and about them going through this hopeless cycle. Somebody must have had a good experience with the judge down here. I'm not sure. Good deal. Here comes the judge. That's something from my childhood. I don't know if Sherry knows what that was about. But anyway, today we're going to talk about a story that happens in the period of the judges that is all about redemption. And I had this big long thing. It would probably take me 20 minutes to do it and to get it right for you. But there's a couple of guys out in Oregon that lead this thing called the Bible Project. And this video is about 7 minutes long, but it is going to set the table for what we're going to talk about in terms of redemption today. So sit back, relax, grab a cup of coffee, pay attention, because it's good.
The book of Ruth. It's a brilliant work of theological art, and it invites us to reflect on the question of how God is involved in the day-to-day joys and hardships of our lives. There are three main characters in the book: Naomi, the widow, Ruth, the Moabite, and Boaz, the Israelite farmer. And their story is told in 4 chapters that are beautifully designed. Let's just dive in and see how this all unfolds. Chapter 1 opens with this line: "In the days when the judges ruled." And it reminds us of the very dark and difficult days from the book of Judges. And here we meet an Israelite family in Bethlehem, struggling to survive through a famine. And so in search of food, they move on to the land of Moab, Israel's ancient enemy. And there the father of the family dies, and the sons marry 2 Moabite women, Ruth and Orpah. And then the sons, they die too. And so they leave only Naomi and these new daughters-in-law. And so Naomi, she has no reason to stay anymore. And so she tells her new daughters-in-law that she's moving back home. And Naomi, she knows that the life of an unmarried foreign widow in Israel is going to be very hard. And so she compels the women to stay behind. Orpah agrees, but Ruth does not. She shows remarkable loyalty to Naomi, and she says, "Wherever you go, I'm going to go. Your people will become my people, and your God will become my God." And so the two of them return to Israel together. And the chapter concludes with Naomi changing her name to Mara, which means bitter in Hebrew, and she laments her tragic fate. Chapter 2 begins with Naomi and Ruth discussing where they're going to find food. And it just so happens to be the beginning of the barley harvest. And so Ruth goes out to look for food, and it just so happens that she ends up picking grain in the field of a man named Boaz, who just so happens to be Naomi's relative. We're told that Boaz is a man of noble character, and he notices Ruth. And so after finding out more about her story, he shows remarkable generosity to her. He makes these special provisions so that the immigrant Ruth can gather grain in his field. And in doing so, Boaz is actually obeying an explicit command of the Torah to show generosity to the immigrant and the poor. Boaz is so impressed by Ruth's loyalty to Naomi. He prays for her, that God will reward her for her boldness. So Ruth comes home that day, and Naomi finds out that she met Boaz, and she is thrilled. She says Boaz is their family redeemer. Now, this family redeemer thing, this was a cultural practice in Israel where if a man in the family died and he left behind a wife or children or land, it was the family redeemer's responsibility to marry that widow, to take up the land and protect that family. So Naomi, she begins to hope that perhaps there might still be a future for her family. Chapter 3 begins with Naomi and Ruth making a plan to get Boaz to notice their situation. So Ruth is going to stop wearing clothes of a grieving widow, and she's going to show signs that she's available to be married. And so Ruth goes to meet Boaz on the farm that night. And as she approaches, Boaz wakes up, and he's totally startled. And Ruth makes her intentions very clear. She asks if Boaz will redeem Naomi's family and marry her. Boaz is once again amazed by Ruth's loyalty to Naomi and her family, and he calls Ruth a woman of noble character. It's the same term used to describe the woman of Proverbs 31. So Boaz tells Ruth to wait until the next day, and he will redeem both Ruth and Naomi legally before the town elders. And so the chapter ends with Ruth returning to Naomi, and they marvel together at all of these recent events. In chapter 4, it all comes together. It turns out, at the last minute, Boaz discovers there is a family member who's closer to Naomi than he is, and he's actually eligible before him to redeem the family. But at the last second, this family member finds out that he's going to have to marry Ruth, the Moabite, and so he declines. But Boaz, remember, he knows Ruth's true character, and so he acquires the family property of Naomi, and he marries Ruth. And so just at the beginning, how Ruth was loyal to Naomi's family, so now Boaz is loyal to Naomi's family as well. The story concludes with a reversal of all of the tragedies from chapter 1. So the death of the husband and the sons is reversed as Ruth is married again and gives birth to a new son, granting joy to Naomi. And this symmetry between the opening and the closing, it's even more remarkable. So remember, the opening tragedy was followed by a great act of loyalty on the part of Ruth. And that is now matched by Boaz's act of loyalty that leads to the family's final restoration. And this symmetry, it highlights the design of the internal chapters as well. So each of the chapters begins with Naomi and Ruth making a plan for their future, and that's followed by a providential meeting between Ruth and Boaz, and each chapter concludes with Naomi and Ruth rejoicing at what's taken place. This story is beautifully designed, and that design actually connects with a really interesting feature of the story, and that's how little God is mentioned. Right, the characters talk about God a few times, but the narrator actually never once mentions God doing anything directly in the story, and that's its brilliance. Because God's providence is at work behind every scene of this story, weaving together the circumstances and choices of all these characters. So Naomi, her tragedy leads her to think that God is punishing her, but actually the whole story is about God's mission to restore her and her family. And he's doing so through Ruth, through her boldness and loyalty, which brings healing to Naomi's life, but not without Boaz, who's a no-nonsense farmer who's full of generosity and loyalty. And so God uses his integrity combined with Ruth's boldness to save Naomi and her family. And so this story brilliantly explores the interplay of God's purposes and will with human decision and will. God weaves together the faithful obedience of his people to bring about his redemptive purposes in the world. And that leads to the real end of the story. The book of Ruth concludes with a genealogy, showing how Boaz and Ruth's son, Oved, was the grandfather of King David, from whom came the lineage of the Messiah. And so all of a sudden, these seemingly mundane, ordinary events in this story are woven into God's grand story of redemption for the whole world. And so the book of Ruth invites us to consider how God might be at work in the very ordinary, mundane details of our lives as well. And that's what the book of Ruth is all about.
Is that not cool? I challenge you to go online. If there are parts of the Bible you don't understand, these guys really make it clear. So redemption is all about what? Oh, you can say it out loud again. Redemption means to? Say it again. Redemption means to? The truth of the matter is that all of us understand that part of our lives results from redemption. There are people like Jason Hilton and Alvaro James, who was here from the Latinx community in our first service to talk about how we're helping to redeem culture by giving culture order. Scott just brought me this Sewell, was a Marine who understands what it was like to offer his blood in sacrifice for this country. So today we're going to talk about redemption, and we're going to talk about God's bigger story of what redemption is about. But here's the thing. If you are alive and if you are breathing, you have been redeemed in some way. And the ultimate way that God wants to do it is that you take him at the core of your heart and your life and follow him as the way and the truth and life. Because it is the way to truth and to life and to life more abundant. But today we want to talk about how God constantly uses insiders to include outsiders in his resurrection plan. God constantly uses insiders to include outsiders in his resurrection plan, in his redemption plan. By the way, redemption and resurrection work together. You're not redeemed until you understand that you've been resurrected. The resurrected king is resurrecting you. And if you're not dead, he's not done. Greater things are still to come, as the song said so beautifully. Here's the other thing. Is there anybody in the room that primarily came from a Jewish ethnicity? Your family was Jewish. All right. We did have a few folks in the first service. Thank God. If it was not for Jews, there would not be Christians. So that's part of the reason that we as the church focus a lot on Israel and the Jews and that kind of stuff. But here's the thing. You're an outsider. And God's plan was initially for his family. But because of numerous circumstances, God kicked the doors down and kicked the doors open to include you and to include me. It's about redemption. There are people that wear uniforms, whether they are police officers like Captain Hilton or people that are far afield and overseas. There are people in this room like Mr. Kepler, who used to be in the Navy, and Bobby Yonker, who used to be a SEAL. You know what it's like to sign up and say, I'm going to fight for somebody else. And if I die, I die. Let me just let you in on the secret. One out of one of us is going to die. So live your life for something worth dying for. You were worth dying for. You were worth God coming from heaven to say, I want him, and I want her, and I want her. And I want her, and I want him, and I want them. And I want these guys and those guys. And I want those of you online. By the way, everybody say everybody online. See that we love you in here. Everybody online say hello to us. Here's the second part of this. Mutual family loyalty is part of God's plan of redemption. The psalmist said, God puts the lonely in families. We were not made to live alone. We were not made to do everything on our own. We're not made to try to act like we were independent and we didn't need anybody else. If you want to go look at people that have done that, go back and read about some of the desert fathers and sisters who decided they wanted to go out and live in the desert all by themselves so they get closer to God. They came back weird. Now, you do need time where you go and get away. I'm not talking about that. I'm just saying you weren't designed to go live in an island all by yourself. That's why John Donne said it. No man is an island entire of himself. Naomi, you've learned. Naomi's a Jew. Naomi has two sons, Mahlon and Chilion. They're Jews. They're married to Ruth and to Orpah, and they die. And then comes the time where she's kind of like, you know what, you guys, you got to get out of here. You got to move on. I don't have any more sons. But the story of redemption begins right here. And how intricately you and I are woven together in God's plan will blow your mind when you're able to watch the video when we get to heaven, and sometimes even before. There's a moment comes, and Naomi said to them, each of you go back to your mother's home. May the Lord show kindness to you as you've shown to the dead and to me. May the Lord grant each of you rest in the house of a new husband. She kissed them, and then she wept loudly. By the way, in this message today, there will be tears. Some of mine and maybe some of yours. You know what she's trying to do? She's trying to say, there's no hope. Don't stay with me. I'm just old. And my husband's dead, and I don't have any children, and I can't help you anymore. They said to her, we insist on returning with you to your people. Again, they wept loudly. And then Orpah, she decided, Orpah kissed her mother-in-law and then peaced out. She thought about it twice. She's like, yeah, maybe I needed to leave and go find somebody else. But Ruth clung to her. Here's what you need to know about Orpah and about Ruth. Incidentally, anybody know somebody in our society named Oprah? Her name comes from this. Apparently on her birth certificate, somebody misspelled Orpah and spelled it Oprah, and the world has never been the same. In many good ways. Honestly, I love you, Oprah. Super Soul Sunday. Naomi said, look, your sister-in-law has gone back to be with her people and to her gods. Something really important in that. Ruth and Orpah were part of the Moabite family. You're like, Moabite? I know the Bible has a bunch of ites, Moabites, Amalekites, Ammonites, termites. I mean, there are all kinds of things in that, right? Moab was the family of Lot. You remember the story of Lot? Sodom and Gomorrah? Lot and his wife are leaving. God says, don't look back. Lot's wife turns back. She becomes a pillar of salt. See, the people that were Moabites were jacked up, messed up people who knew God's plan and they went the wrong way. And that's why Sodom and Gomorrah was destroyed. You see what God's doing here? Even those who messed up, he's going back to get them. and include them. Today we live in a society where people, they're red and yellow and black and white, and all sorts of different permutations of color of skin. You guys need to remember there is a granddaddy Adam and there is a grandmother Eve. So I hope you will go to Cinco de Mayo this weekend on Saturday. I'll be out there some. There'll be somebody out there going, dun, 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 dun. Maria, Maria. You know? Part of what you need to do if you are a white gringo like me is you need to go and get out there with those that are different than you, because it's practice for heaven, y'all. Name of Jesus. Follow your sister-in-law. Follow her. Get out of here. No matter anybody in here, parent. I mean, our kids can do stuff to us. I know because I am a kid and I did something to my parents. But if they come back, are you not going to throw your arms around them and say, I kind of get this picture of, you know what it's like when a dog shows up in your yard or a stray cat, and you try to go, shoo, shoo, and then they lick your hand. It's like, get out of here. Closing my eyes. My wife said to me after we sent our 2 dogs to heaven, Darryl Robinson, who prays with me, he says there's no dogs go to heaven. I said, if they don't, I don't want to go. Anyway, he might be right, though. She's trying to say, go on. I got nothing to give you. Ruth replied, don't plead with me to abandon you or to return and not follow you. For wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you live, I'm going to live. Your people will be my people, and your God, capital G. Orpah went back to the little g gods. Ruth went to the capital G God, will be my God. And then she says, where you die, I will die, and there I'll be buried. May the Lord punish me and do so severely. I mean, she is calling down punishments on herself if she doesn't keep her promise to stick it out with Naomi. If anything but death separates you and me, an outsider and an insider. And God's going to use an outsider to save the insiders. God has called you and me to do one thing in this earth, to love, period. To love him with all we got, with our energy, with our time, with our talents, with our treasure, with our real estate, with our cars, with our bank accounts, with our children, our dogs and cats. Videos of cats and dogs are our people. And to love one another. Then God has always used a redeemer to redeem. He's always done that. From the beginning, when Adam and Eve sinned and he kills animals to cover them with the shed blood of the animals, it becomes symbolic of the fact that you've got to be covered. There's a term called this propitiation, which means payment. It's redemption. It's buying you back. So you're worth it. And ultimately, there was one who was to come to be the ultimate redeemer. And you and I get to be part of his plan. And then realize there's always been a proper process that has to be followed for redemption to occur. It's just like this one up here. All right, can you imagine? Ladies, I mean, you're married. Ladies out there, raise your hand. Very good. I'm not imagining, I don't want you to go to a dark place, but imagine something happens to your husband. In this culture, you went back to your husband's brothers. You go, ooh. Which one would you pick? Then you go like, I don't need that anymore, baby. I got my own assets. And I got an Instagram account and a Facebook account, and there's Single Mingle and 23andMe, and I'm going to find somebody out there. I don't need no family to redeem me. Are you with me? Ruth didn't have that. And this is the way the system worked. And there's beauty in the system because there's true love before there is anything that goes on physical. And then when a redeemer redeems, their family becomes part of the redemptive plan. God has made the local church, ladies and gentlemen, to be the hope of the world when it functions correctly. We have people in this room that work for the government. They're government officials. You guys are part of God's plan, but you're not the hope. If you do, you're elected office, do your job. But it's the church's job to do only what the church can do so that the world can be redeemed. Incidentally, our students and our children and adults all through this year, every week, we're lining up so that what we are talking about each week, we're giving you a question at the end of the message so you can talk about it as a family. So this week's thread question is, how can God use you, son, daughter, mom, dad, to be part of God's redemptive plan and rescue people? I want you to go talk about that at lunch today and the rest of the week, because that's God's desire for us. So you see the story. So Ruth's kind of like, she goes back and she moves, and she's out in the field. She's doing a little barley harvest thing, and then she notices Boaz is paying attention to her. Now, Boaz is a little bit older than she is. My stepfather was 10 years older than my mother when they married. And by the way, he always was. But Ruth learns that he's a possibility. He's a man of good reputation. And she's out doing the work. She's trying just to get enough barley to make it and that kind of stuff. But then she notices that Boaz is beginning to pay attention to her. So she gets her best makeup and she gets ready. She puts on her best dress. She reaches over on the shelf and she pulls out some Savage and she goes. So Boaz took Ruth and she became his wife. You saw the story. Let me make it personal. I wish there was time for you to come up here and people got to know who you are. One of the reasons we're doing this series about people, we're doing name tags, is because we don't want people to come in here and just be 250s. I just said my social security 2 numbers too fast so you couldn't write it down. That's why we have donuts outside for you to eat this afternoon on the way out or this morning. So you can have time to hang. So you get to meet people. And here's who I am. Here's my story. Here's my story. God redeemed my family. He redeemed my family with family. So for those of you that are new with us and those that have not been here, my dad was a private pilot. When I was 8.5 years old, he died in a plane crash. It took him 3 weeks to find them, zip them up in a bag. And I learned about death early in life, and it's affected my life. It did. My mom had me and Roger and Richard. One of her sons was dead. She said, it was so hard. She said, I love your daddy, but it was hard to lose my boy. And my dad had taken out an insurance policy. He had one more thing to do, big life insurance policy, to get a physical. He was supposed to get the physical the week the plane crashed. Incidentally, if you don't have insurance and you love somebody in this room, you need to go get some insurance. I'm not selling. I'm not telling you where to go, but don't leave somebody destitute if you can help it. But God saved my family with my dad's family and my mom's family. The Hardees and the Wards, the Booths and the Rankins. We went back to live at home because we didn't have anything. Our family redeemed us. And in so doing, we saw in living, breathing, cinematic color what life was all about. Three and a half years later, my mom met my pop, and my pop's wife had died of breast cancer back when they couldn't do that much. He was telling me he carried his first wife up the steps of Mercy Hospital. He said, "Somebody please help her." But she died like my dad died, and God brought them together. My brother Roger always says that he knew Pop was going to be a great dad when he would come to visit Mom when he was dating, and one night he brought us a color television set. He's going to be a great dad. He could have given up. My mom could have given up, but God gave them one another. And then after 35 years of marriage, I might have the numbers wrong. Pop developed Alzheimer's disease and died. A long, slow death. And she said as hard as it was to lose Daddy and Robbie, it was harder to lose your Pop. He was such a good man. And I can't wait. I get to have to introduce you to all my family. He redeemed us. After my mom and dad's family redeemed us. And the truth of the matter is, I'm really just kind of an 8-year-old kid who grew up with a family redeemed. Not a perfect family. Please don't get that idea. Don't think our pastor just has such a perfect family. Oh, no, they didn't. No, they didn't do everything right. But they did what they could because they loved us. And so do yours, and so do you. My mom is 90. She turned 90 last week. 90 decades, or 9 decades. 90 years around the sun. Her third husband is 93. And he's such a good man. And God has brought us back again. But if it would not have been for Mother and our extended families, then that pretty lady that sat about 5 rows back in the first service, who has my ring on her finger, would not have been my wife, and there would have been no Andrea. There would certainly have been Andrea. She married somebody else. She probably could have done better. There'd be no Anna, there'd be no Alex, there'd be no Abigail. There'd be no grandchildren, and son-in-law and daughter-in-law, Mark and Erica. And then Easton, and then Ella, and then Blake and Emma coming in July. There would have been none of that. "38 years ago, I put this ring on. I took it off one time to change the oil, and it fell in the grass and almost lost it, and I've never taken it off since. That girl loves Gaston County, and she loves his home. She's the Dallas girl, the Dallas, the first one. Over the years, I have opportunities to go work somewhere else, St. Louis, New Orleans, Columbia. She'd always say, "Are you coming home on the weekends?" I ain't going. Your story is as important as mine. But Pastor Ray, you don't understand. I've got heartache. I know we all do. And I know some of you have been abused. Some of you have not had the good stuff. I want to tell you something about my family. They weren't perfect. At least 2 or 3 of my grandparents were racist. Now they're in heaven and they know better now. But it's not about perfection. It's about becoming perfected in Him. He was willing to be perfect for you and for me. So many of you are out there. You're watching live. Well, one day when I'm good enough, maybe God will accept me. It's not about that. Jesus came to be good enough for all of you. To be perfect for all of you. to be able to pay the price for our redemption. But Boaz and Ruth did their part. Boaz, the insider, took Ruth, the outsider, and she became his wife. He slept with her. Y'all know what that means. They're out there in the rooms back over here. You know what that means. Their children on the other side of the wall. And the Lord granted conception to her, and she gave birth to a son. The woman said to Naomi, the women around the society, they're going like, blessed be the Lord, who's not left you without a family redeemer today. May his name become well known in Israel. There's hope because somebody's willing to do something unselfish and love this world in practical ways. Next weekend, we're going to do something here on Mother's Day. Incidentally, if you are a mother of young children, you've never dedicated your children, see somebody in Kids Pointe, got a little process we want you to go through. We'd love to do that next weekend. But next weekend also, we're going to do some mothering and fathering in a different way. I'm just going to ask you to pray about it. You're going to like, what are we going to do? Not what Boaz and Ruth did. This is going to be different. See, Solomon had fathered Boaz. And Boaz fathered Obed. And then Obed fathered Jesse. And Jesse fathered David. David? Oh. Here's the rest of the story. Joseph also went up from the town of Nazareth to Galilee, to Judea, to the city of David, which is called Bethlehem, because he was the house and the family line of David. While they were there, the time came for her to give birth. That she gave birth to her firstborn son, and she wrapped him tightly in cloth and laid him in a manger. She had God in her hands. And God entrusted his son to a woman and her husband that were willing to do this. They did their part so that Jesus could do it once and for all of us. But we now get to be part of it too. They laid him in a manger because there was no guest room available for them. See, God works to rescue and redeem. So what? That's what he does. To put it simply, to love us and to get us to love him and one another. One of the things that I never wanted to do was to get my parents in trouble because of something I did. So I was sneaky mean. I was sneaky sinful. I did not want to bring dishonor to their name. And today I don't want to bring dishonor to God's name by not offering you what he did through Christ to you and me. Many people, most people perhaps in this room within the sound of my voice watching online, you at least concerned, you're interested in Jesus? If you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord, and that God, believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. Not just to get a ticket to wave into heaven and say, I got my ticket. Now I'm going to live however I want to in this world. No, when you understand what God has done for you, you want to love like he was. And do what he did. Pastor, I live in the real world. I'm a minister. I see more of the real world every week than you can ever imagine. Very babies try to repair marriages that are breached. Dealt with people that are in clinical depression. I know some real world. I go see my mechanics. They say, how was the work yesterday? I say, good. You only work 9 to 12 on Sunday morning. The rest of the week I got off. Not. But I love you. God loves you. God loves you. And God loves you. But he wants all of you. Not just part of you. He wants all of you. Here's what I challenge you to be able to say today. Not only that God works to rescue and redeem, but also that you can say as you click offline today, Jesus is my Redeemer, and I will be a part of his family of the redeemed. Turn to somebody beside you and say, you're redeemed. Kids are going, don't get weird with me, Dad. So here's what I want to challenge you to do. We're going to sing a song. Thank you, Jonathan, our team, for doing it. By the way, these are people. They're not performers. They needed to be redeemed too. Thank you. How do you do this? Here's what if you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and you believe in your heart that God is raising from the dead, that you will be saved. He is your only hope. He's made it possible for us to be right with God. Have you made yourself right with God? Your mom, here's the deal, right? God's used your mom and your dad and your grandparents and your great-grandparents and all that kind of stuff, your aunts and your uncles. There comes this time in your life where it's just you and God. Have you done it? If not, say to him today while your eyes are closed right now, say, dear Jesus, I want you. Thank you for saving me. Help me to be part of your family.